Rolling forward, Dr. Sister Science Facts.
Welcome to this week's episode of Rolling Forward Podcast. You know it's been a long week when I can't even say my own name.
Rolling forward, Dr. Sister Science Facts.
I'm Dr. Alicia Rolin.
I'm Dr. Stephanie Rolin.
And this episode, we are going to talk about the highlights from the confirmation hearing.
That's right. This week, RFK Jr. had two Senate confirmation hearings. These were hearings, one with the Finance Committee, one with Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions, I think it is. Two Senate committees met in order to consider his nomination to be HHS Secretary. And although we promise that this podcast is not going to turn into an RFK Jr. podcast, we thought it was important to bring in some highlights from these hearings because whoever is selected to lead HHS is going to have a profound impact on healthcare in America.
There's a lot of really interesting information, a lot of important information that came out of these trials. Or they're not a trial, it feels like a trial. So there's a lot of really important information about RFK and the future of healthcare and how he sees healthcare being led in America. But it's like 6 hours. So let's give you the highlights.
So the first thing that I took away, Alicia, was he has this morality approach to healthcare that if you make good choices, you deserve to be healthy. And if you make quote unquote bad choices like smoking, well, that's your problem.
So let me play this quote. So this is a quote from the first day at the confirmation hearing. And this is Senator Bernie Sanders asking RFK Jr. about his stance on healthcare and if he thinks that healthcare is a right or a privilege.
Do you agree with me that the United States should join every other major country on earth and guarantee healthcare to all people as a human right? Yes? No?
Senator, I can't give you a yes or no answer to that question.
Healthcare a human right? Is healthcare a human right?
In the way that free speech is a human right,
Yeah.
I would say it's different because with free speech doesn't cost anybody anything, but in healthcare, if you smoke cigarettes for 20 years and you get cancer, you are now taking from the pool.
Well,
and so are you guaranteed the same right, or is there also a duty?
I'm sorry. I'd love to talk for an hour with you. We got a few minutes left here.
I heard that exchange and it was really concerning because there seems to be this approach of blaming people. It just really felt backwards to me.
I found this to be particularly alarming that not everybody deserves access to good healthcare. And to suggest that if you make bad health decisions, you have to be rich in order to afford healthcare. It's just alarming.
And we make decisions every day about our health. Some mornings I get up and run, and some mornings, like today, I get out of bed and I sit on the couch. To suggest that decisions about health are so simple, and if you make a bad choice, we're human. We're not perfect.
And people have really changed their life around. People make bad, in quote, decisions, and then they change. Lots of people have issues with substance use that later they are clean and sober and leave a healthy, meaningful life just because they smoke cigarettes, just because there were other issues of substance use 40 years ago. Does that mean that they don't deserve health care?
Exactly. And even if someone is currently smoking or using substances or drinking, it also doesn't mean that they're not worthy of healthcare in that moment. There's a potential that they can make other choices in the future. But I think it's disappointing because something that's important to know about RFK Jr. himself is his own history of making less than optimal health choices, shall we say. And here's a quote from the hearing where he talks about that.
I was a heroin addict for 14 years. I've been 42 years in recovery. I go to 12-step meetings every day, so I hear the stories every day. And I hear the many stories about denial of, or the barriers to access to care.
So in this part, he's talking about his own history of being, his own label is a heroin addict for 14 years, and that he's hearing from people how hard it is for them to access treatment. But on the other hand, he just said that if you make a bad choice, like smoking, then you shouldn't be pulling from the pool.
I agree. Very disappointing. I think it's particularly disappointing. I think this merits being said. His uncle, Senator Ted Kennedy, spent his entire political career trying to improve healthcare access. And there are many quotes of him saying that his family has had great healthcare in the setting of being able to financially afford it, and that everybody should be able to afford healthcare. And RFK Jr. is totally on a different wavelength than his uncle.
Absolutely. And he's saying something like, make America healthy again. But how are you going to make America healthy if people can't get health care?
I think there's a caveat in that sentence. Make Americans that deserve it healthy again. That is his slogan, is make some people in America healthy again.
I agree. His approach right now does not make it seem like it's health for all. So that was one of our big takeaways. He's going to be coming in with an approach about morality and worth and consequences of your choices. And that's something that can really trickle down with the everyday health policies and procedures we're going to start seeing.
For me, that was like big red flag number one. It was alarming by how upfront he was about that. That there was no attempts to hide his views.
No, he was upfront about. Something that he was less upfront about was his questionable history on vaccines.
This was a huge focus from both days of the confirmation hearing.
And as we've talked about before, including the prior episode leading up to these hearings, RFK Jr. has a long history of spreading vaccine misinformation and disinformation. And that is something that he was asked about again and again.
During this hearing, he says that he is pro-vaccine. He keeps saying, I'm not anti-vaccine, I am pro-safety. Those are the words that he's been using. And he says that if we show him the science, if we learn more science that vaccines are safe, that he will support that. Senator Cassidy is a Republican from Louisiana, and he is a gastroenterologist, so he's a physician.
If you show me data, I will be the first person to assure the American people that they need to take those vaccines.
Now, what concerns me is that you've cast doubt on some of these vaccines, but the data has been there for a long time. I've been in Congress for 16 years, and this data was in large measure generated before I came to Congress. So my concern is that you never acquainted yourself with anything that might contradict that what you were previously saying. So let me ask once more. If the data is brought to you, and these studies that have been out there for quite some time and have been peer-reviewed, and it shows that these two vaccines are not associated with autism, will you ask, no, I need even more? Or will you say, I unequivocally and without qualification say that this does not cause autism?
Not only will I do that, but I will apologize for any statements that misled people otherwise.
So that exchange was at the second day of the confirmation hearing. And people keep saying that we're split down party lines. Senator Cassidy is a Republican, and Senator Cassidy had a lot of questions for RFK Jr. about his statements on vaccines coming from the perspective of someone that had practiced medicine for many years.
Senator Cassidy, Dr. Cassidy, he shared his own personal experiences taking care of people who had devastating effects from being infected with hepatitis B. Hepatitis B is a vaccine-preventable illness, and to go around and suggest that these vaccines cause autism, it's so damaging because then people aren't getting the vaccines because of this misinformation, and then they're dying from these illnesses that we can prevent. And that was Senator Cassidy's concern. The other concern here is that the science is there about vaccines, and the data has been there, the science has been there, and RFK Jr. for such a long time has been standing up and spreading this misinformation about vaccine safety, and then he's like, oh, I've never seen the science. Bring me the science and I'll review it. What are you doing spreading this misinformation if you've never even looked at the science?
So Senator Bernie Sanders actually brought that up, and he said, this is your job.
Senator, if you show me those studies, I will absolutely, as I promised to Chairman Cassidy, I will apologize.
That is a very troubling response because the studies are there. Your job was to have looked at those studies as an applicant for this job.
It's alarming that you are going to lead healthcare in America and you haven't done your research.
Not only have you not done your research, you're making statements influencing so many people and then openly acknowledging you haven't looked at the science.
His statements over the past 2 days that he is not anti-vaccine contradicts a long history of his anti-vaccine sentiment. At the confirmation hearings, he kept saying that he's not anti-vaccine, and you could believe him because his children are vaccinated.
But
let me play this quote. So this is Senator Wyden.
In your testimony today under oath, you denied that you were anti-vaccine. But during a podcast interview in July of 2023, you said, quote, no vaccine is safe and effective. In your testimony today, you note that all your kids are vaccinated. But in a podcast in 2020, you said,
if I could go back in time and I could avoid giving my children the vaccines that I gave them, I would do anything for that. I would pay anything to be able to do that.
Mr. Kennedy, all of these things cannot be true. So, are you lying to Congress today when you say you are pro-vaccine? Or did you lie on all those podcasts? We have all of this on tape, by the way.
this is so damaging. Statements like this makes it hard to trust him because he's putting forward the fact that his children are vaccinated as proof that he's not anti-vax. But then he's also saying that that's his biggest regret. It's really hard to trust anything he's saying.
He has been very staunchly anti-vaccine for decades. He has published many books. He has been on many podcasts. He has straight up told people, don't vaccinate your children. It's dangerous. And now he's like, oh, I never said that.
And I just haven't seen the science. Just bring me the science and I'll be the first to say that I'm wrong. What have you been doing when you're writing these books? How are you doing your research if you're not looking at the science and the data that's peer reviewed and out there?
And then senators kept being like, here's the science. Here are 40 studies I brought with me. Here are 100 studies I brought with me. And he kept saying, we need to repeat the science. We need to replicate it. There's not enough evidence.
One thing that I want to know about RFK Jr. is like, if he missed all of these papers, I want to know, like, how is he doing research? Like, is he on Twitter, on X doing research? Like, how is he doing his research?
Also, like, he's giving science equal weight. Like, this one study is equal to 600 other studies.
For someone who wants replication, he doesn't really seem to take it seriously.
He wants replication and then won't read the results. There are decades of evidence. Vaccines have been in use
For a long time. And there's nothing wrong with wanting to replicate science, with wanting to repeat studies and making sure one study isn't what we're basing everything off. That's true. But this is science that has been replicated, that has been done, and there is harm to continuing to revisit this closed question. And that harm exists in, number one, diverting research away from other programs like developing cures to cancers that are killing people right now, preparing for the pandemic threat of bird flu. There's only so much money that's being invested in healthcare, and the more that we spend revisiting this, the less that we have for the new threats that are coming. And then the second thing is the impact that this is having on parents. Senator Hassan said this in a really eloquent way.
I am the proud mother of a 36-year-old young man with severe cerebral palsy. And a day does not go by when I don't think about what did I do when I was pregnant with him that might have caused the hydrocephalus that has so impacted his life. So please do not suggest that anybody in this body of either political party doesn't want to know what the cause of autism is. Do you know how many friends I have with children who have autism? The problem is because he's relitigating and churning settled science so we can't go forward and find out what the cause of autism is and treat these kids and help these families. Mr. Kennedy, that first autism study rocked my world. And like every mother, I worried about whether, in fact, the vaccine had done something to my son. And you know what? It was a tiny study of about 12 kids, and over time, the scientific community studied and studied and studied and found that it was wrong. And the journal retracted the study. And when you continue to sow doubt about settled science, it makes it impossible for us to move forward. So that's what the problem is here. It's the relitigating and rehashing and continuing to sow doubt so we can't move forward. And it freezes us in place.
To end kind of this section on vaccine, I think the American people need is exactly what Senator Whitehouse asked RFK Jr. to do. He said, if you want to move from advocacy to public responsibility, Americans are going to need to hear a clear and trustworthy recantation of what you have said on vaccinations, including a promise that you will never say vaccines aren't medically safe when in fact they are, and making it indisputably clear that you support mandatory vaccinations against diseases that will keep people safe.
Whew.
And even that, I'm not sure will be enough.
Because something else that came up during these hearings is it wasn't really clear that RFK Jr. fully understood what's involved in running HHS.
Over and over again throughout the 6 hours, he confused Medicaid and Medicare. He was unclear about the powers of the Department of Health and Human Services. He didn't understand the laws. He didn't understand the capacity. And it was alarming that he's interviewing for a job that honestly he knows nothing about.
There were so many times that senators were asking him basic questions about how HHS and its various agencies run. And he would say, oh, I misspoke, or I didn't mean that, or, he would try to amend it. But they were having to provide him with the basic facts around HHS for him to be able to answer questions. And even then, he couldn't keep it clear.
He kept fumbling about the differences between Medicare Part A, B, and C. And he didn't understand that Medicare Part C is private. We've talked about the Department of Health and Human Services before. It is confusing. It is complex. We're not interviewing for that job.
That is so true. This was not a one-time misspeak. These were over and over again in these 6 hours. Senators were educating him about basic policies and procedures at HHS.
At one point, he was claiming that one of the largest complaints about Medicaid is that it was costing too much for families and that the premiums were too high. There are no premiums on Medicaid.
He also said something about how there was no police powers of HHS when actually CMS, the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services, regularly do enforcement. And he just wasn't even aware that that was part of what CMS does.
He said that Medicaid and Medicare were 100% federally funded, when in fact, states contribute a significant portion of funding to these programs. Ooh, that's my computer. I'll turn that off.
So these aren't just simple misstatements. These are basic facts. So there are definitely some concerns about his qualifications.
I just feel like in any job, government or non-government, you would never be interviewing a candidate to lead a department of something that they know nothing about.
And this is the amount of money that goes into HHS each year is huge. So the powers he's going to have is enormous. And if he doesn't understand what they do at a fundamental level, it's concerning what that will look like.
And you mentioned that he's not qualified. It's not that he's not a physician. Lots of secretaries of Health and Human Services have not been physicians. For the most part, they're not. They tend to be people with a background in healthcare finance. He's not a physician, but he also doesn't have a background in finance, and he doesn't have a background in healthcare.
No, he doesn't. As we've talked about, he has a background in environmental law.
He has a background in conspiracy theories.
That was the other thing that really came out in this was the conspiracy theories.
Oh my God.
It was a lot. He was asked directly about this. This was so good. This is Senator Kaine reading a tweet of RFK Jr.'s.
On 9/11, it's hard to tell what is conspiracy theory and what isn't. I'd like to introduce that for the record, Mr. Chair. We take that kind of stuff pretty personally. Virginians know what happened on 9/11, and we don't need folks giving oxygen to conspiracy theories about 9/11. Now, one thing I noticed about this post is it was in July of 2024. It was 23 years after 9/11. You had a lot going on in your life. You were running for president then. What made you decide in the midst of everything going on in this country, in this world in July of 2024 in your own candidacy for president, that now was the time to say it's hard to tell what is conspiracy and what isn't about 9/11? What was so important about making this point in July of 2024?
Senator, the dramatic drop in trust in our government, and this is particularly one of the templates for that is what happened at CDC.
Yeah, no, I want to move aside from that. Because you say, you go on to say, I won't take sides as president, I won't take sides on 9/11. Wow. I won't take sides on 9/11. Let me ask you this. As a general matter, do you find it hard to tell what is a conspiracy theory and what isn't? Is that kind of a general deficit that you find in your own analytical abilities?
My father told me when I was 13 years old, he said, people in authority lie, and that the job of a citizen in every democracy is to maintain a fierce skepticism.
Okay, I get it.
Government authority.
And you're an authority, but you wouldn't take sides on 9/11.
I never thought that we'd be talking about sides on 9/11.
I'm just going to say that he's the authority that's lying.
Wow, I believe that.
So it came out over and over again. People were bringing up many of the conspiracy theories that he has said and then asking if he had ever said these things. Sometimes he said yes, sometimes said no. And then they would bring up the context in which he had said it.
He would say, no, I never said that. The senators had their receipts and were like, here's the quote of you saying it. And he was like, oh, maybe I did say that.
So Senator Bennett asked, did you say that Lyme disease is a militarized bioweapon? And RFK's response, I probably said that.
There's a lot going on in his mind. And the thing about conspiracy theories, these things do harm.
He's providing legitimacy to things that should not be in question. He's providing legitimacy to anti-science. And there were hundreds of conspiracy theories that were brought up.
Dozens at least.
Dozens, including COVID-19 was genetically engineered to target specific racial and ethnic groups.
I just can't with that. It's so disturbing. And I think Senator Kaine really got at it. Like, do you find it hard to tell what's real and what's not, what's a conspiracy and what's not? And the reality is it is hard for him. If he's 23 years later talking about, I won't take sides on 9/11, just imagine what that will look like in the midst of a health outbreak, in the midst of a pandemic, when somebody like this is leading HHS.
Will he not take sides with evidence and no evidence?
I won't take sides on bird flu. Maybe it's good, maybe it's bad. I don't know. It's concerning. And that putting these conspiracy theories out there takes resources away from the trusted science that we need. And then it also perpetuates stigma.
Senator Smith.
Mr. Chair, thank you. Welcome, Mr. Kennedy. I know that you and your family have had personal experience with mental health challenges, as have I. So do you believe, as you've said, that antidepressants cause school shootings? This should be a simple question.
I don't think anybody can answer that question. I said it should be studied along with other potential culprits, but I don't know. There's no science on that.
Well,
Senator.
there is, Mr. Kennedy. Science shows that there is no link between school shootings and antidepressants.
He's like, I don't know. I just said we needed to study it. We just need to study it. I don't know. There's no evidence that SSRIs cause school shootings, and he just hasn't seen the science. And then by making statements like that, it is harmful and it's perpetuating a stigma around mental health.
And most school shooters have never been on an SSRI before in their life, and maybe it would have helped them.
Having good mental health helps you make decisions that are better for you and better for other people. We should be promoting good mental health.
100%. So the last thing that came out of these trials, they're not trials. I keep calling them trials.
I did feel that way, yeah.
The last things that came out of these hearings that was highly concerning to me was that RFK Jr. kept making it clear that regardless of his opinion, regardless of fact, regardless of science, that he will blindly follow President Trump's directions over everything else.
The number of times that he said, well, President Trump this, President Trump that, he said this, he said that. It got to the point that Senator Hassan, I think, confronted him about this. Was he just going to be a rubber stamp for the administration?
Senator Hassan did question a lot about selling out his values in order to gain this position, but that quote actually came from Senator Cortez Masto, and I think it's worth listening to.
My question to you is, why are you there? Are you there to be a rubber stamp to this administration and cave into all of these positions that they're taking?
So these are many quotes that he said when talking to a senator from Montana. He said, President Trump has not yet asked me to take a stand on how to regulate mifepristone. Whatever he does, I will implement those policies.
Oh, no.
He said it twice. He said it on each day. So that was day one.
Oh.
On day two, Senator Baldwin again brought up mifepristone and how much science he needed. And again, he iterated, President Trump has not taken a stance on mifepristone. And once he has a policy, I will implement his policy.
And this is the moment that I felt true fear, because mifepristone is a medication that is used for elective terminations. It is safe. There are more than 100 studies stating how safe it is. So we've got the replication. And complications occur in about 1% of people who take this medication. So 99% of people have no complications.
It's been FDA approved for 25 years.
And when asked if there was enough science to support the safety of mifepristone, that it would continue to be made available to people, and he said he would follow Trump's policy on whether mifepristone would be available or not. And that is scary because that is policy and personal opinion over science.
Senator Hassan also said,
You are willing to sacrifice your values, your knowledge, if President Trump tells you to do that. That, to me, is unacceptable in a Secretary of Health and Human Services.
and I think that sums it up really well. The reason why we have people in these positions is to educate the executive branch. It's to provide support. It's to lead the American people. One person cannot be an expert in everything. If you are blindly bending to the will of the executive branch, like, why are you there? Why do you exist?
Something that really was so apparent. Healthcare in America, under RFK Jr., it's going to be implementing the policies that President Trump comes up with without regard to the science, the implications, or how it's going to affect people.
I mean, he kept saying it himself. He kept saying, I will do whatever President Trump tells me to. And if you look through his history, he's also flip-flopped on a ton of stances to match what President Trump has said. And so for many years, RFK Jr. has been pro-choice. He thinks the government should not be involved in a woman's decision. And in the past few months, he has totally 180'd in this stance. And that was brought up by many people during the confirmation hearing.
He's just changed all of his views to emulate the views of Trump. And that's concerning because it means we don't know what RFK Jr. stands for, and we don't know what he's going to do in this position because everything that he says is shifting, inconsistent, and can be contradicted by finding something else that he said.
One question he was unable to answer was, quote, when was it that you decided to sell out the values you've had your whole life in order to be given power by President Trump?
And the confirmation hearings have ended. They were January 29th and January 30th, but the votes have not yet happened. So this is a time, if you have feelings, to reach out to your senators, to reach out to people and share how you're feeling. This is going to be a very, very close vote, and that's why we want to share the science, the facts, the statements that were made at these hearings with you.
The Republican Party has a majority in the Senate. 3 Republicans need to oppose his nomination.
And no Democrats to support it.
And no Democrats. So all the Democrats and 3 Republicans need to oppose his nomination in order for him not to be nominated.
This is going to be a close one. This is a contentious one.
And there are a lot of eyes on a specific number of senators, including Senator Cassidy, who we talked about, a Republican from Louisiana that spent his career as a gastroenterologist. There's eyes on Mitch McConnell, who personally experienced polio. And there's thoughts that him having experienced that, he'll have pro-polio vaccination stance. It's super sad to me that you have to experience polio to understand polio.
If confirmed, it will have a major impact on healthcare in America. We wanted to share this with you because whether he's confirmed or not, these statements, they're really important.
I think these confirmation hearings made it clear how unqualified he is. And that he is in this position because he has pledged loyalty to President Trump.
He will be a yes man. He made that clear.
I am concerned. I am worried about the future of healthcare in America if this is the path that we're going down.
And it isn't about a particular party. It's when personal loyalties matter more than science. That's the concern. No matter who that personal loyalty is to, science and facts need to come first.
I can hold different personal beliefs about healthcare delivery than politicians, than people that have been the Secretary of Health and Human Services in the past. But I feel like prior secretaries, even from different political parties have had good intentions, have wanted to improve healthcare. We have just disagreed about how to improve healthcare. With RFK Jr., I'm concerned about his lack of understanding of healthcare in America. And I'm not sure that he has particularly good intentions.
Confirmed or not, we'll be right here with you following these changes in healthcare in America. I'm Dr. Stephanie Rolin.
I'm Dr. Alicia Rolin.
This is the Rolling Forward podcast. Please like, subscribe, follow us on social media. We're sharing some different audio quotes there as well.
You can always send us an email at rollinforwardshow, ROLIN_show@gmail.com.
And that's our show for this week. Thank you for tuning in.
See you next time. And now we're going to make coffee. I'm going to make more coffee.
Okay. Let's stop.
Stop.